Over the last few months, Flex tools have quietly started disappearing from Lowe's shelves. And most people assume it means the brand is failing. That assumption is wrong. This decision wasn't driven by tool quality, bad reviews, or customer complaints. It was driven by how Lowe's measures performance inside the store and how quickly a brand has to justify its place in the aisle. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how that system works and why Flex ended up on the wrong side of it. Once you understand the process, the pullback makes sense, and it changes how you should interpret what you're seeing in stores. And it starts with the first thing everyone noticed, but no one explained. The disappearance. Everyone noticed, but no one explained. If you shop at Lowe's regularly, you probably noticed it before anyone talked about it. One visit, Flex tools were there. The next, the display was smaller, then scattered, then gone. There was no announcement, no clearance push, no official explanation from staff beyond, "We're not sure what's happening with that line." That silence is the first clue. This wasn't a customer-facing decision. When a brand actually fails, retailers make it obvious. You see markdown tags, aisle resets, and last chance signage designed to clear inventory fast. None of that happened with Flex. Instead, Flex faded out quietly. Fewer facings, missing SKUs, empty gaps where tools used to sit. That pattern matters because it signals this wasn't about dumping bad product. It was about reducing exposure. Store employees weren't briefed because they didn't need to be. These decisions happen above the store level during category reviews and planogram updates that customers never see. That's why the disappearance felt confusing. The tools didn't suddenly change. Reviews didn't collapse. There was no public trigger event, which raises the real question. If Flex didn't fail publicly, what failed privately? To answer that, you have to stop looking at the tools themselves and start looking at how Lowe's measures success inside the aisle. Because once you understand the math behind shelf space, Flex's disappearance stops being a mystery. Why good tools still get cut by retail math. Inside a Lowe's store, shelf space is not treated like a showroom. It's treated like a financial asset. Every section of the aisle is measured, compared, and ranked based on what it earns back for the store. Quality, reviews, and brand story don't enter that equation unless they translate directly into faster sales. The key metric is revenue per linear foot. A 4-foot section of shelf has to justify itself every month. That means consistent unit movement, predictable restocking, and minimal downtime where product just sits. If one brand sells fewer units in the same space than another, it doesn't matter if the tools are better built. The slower brand becomes a liability. This is where Flex started losing ground at Lowe's. Flex buyers tend to be deliberate. They research, they compare specs, they wait for the right purchase. That creates slower turnover, especially in a physical store where most customers are impulse adjacent. Lowe's is optimized for shoppers who walk in needing something now, not shoppers who are still deciding. From a retail perspective, that gap matters. A tool that sells once every few days but reliably moves is more valuable than a tool that sells occasionally at a higher price. Shelf math favors predictability over potential. Flex didn't fail because nobody wanted it. It struggled because not enough people wanted it quickly. There's another layer to this. Big box retailers don't just look at individual tools. They look at the entire footprint a brand occupies. If a brand needs multiple SKUs on display to explain its value, different models, tiers, and configurations, but only a few of those sell regularly, the whole section gets flagged as inefficient. That inefficiency compounds over time. Slow sellers stay on shelves longer. Longer shelf time increases risk of damage, theft, and outdated inventory. Restocks become irregular. Displays start looking incomplete. And once a brand's section looks inconsistent, it attracts even less attention, which slows sales further. It's a feedback loop that retail systems are designed to correct, not tolerate. When category managers review the numbers, they don't see a solid brand with loyal fans. They see space that could be reassigned to something that moves faster with less explanation. And when space is limited, speed always wins. This is why Flex's situation is often misunderstood. From the outside, it looks irrational. From inside the system, it's mechanical. And once a brand is labeled as slow-moving on paper, the next question becomes unavoidable. Is this brand even positioned correctly for this aisle? That's where Flex ran into its next, bigger problem. Flex is stuck in the most dangerous price position. In a big box store, price isn't just about affordability, it's about clarity. Shoppers move quickly, And most decisions are made in seconds, not minutes. Brands that survive on the shelf usually sit at one of two extremes: clearly affordable or clearly professional. Flex sits in between. For casual DIY shoppers, Flex often looks expensive. When someone walks into Lowe's needing a drill or an impact driver for a weekend project, they're already price aware. They compare quickly. Flex doesn't look like a safe default buy at that moment, especially when lower-priced options sit right next to it. For professional users, the problem is different. Pros tend to buy into ecosystems they already trust. They're not browsing, they're replenishing or expanding systems they've committed to over years. Flex, while capable, doesn't have the same entrenched presence in job site culture or long-term purchasing habits. That puts Flex in a narrow lane. It's priced high enough to scare off impulse buyers, but not entrenched enough to guarantee professional loyalty. Retail data reflects that tension. Mid-premium brands usually require explanation. They need signage, comparison charts, or informed staff to communicate why they're worth more. In a busy store environment, that explanation rarely happens. When the value isn't immediately obvious, shoppers default to what's familiar. This is why mid-tier pricing is often the first to be cut during category optimization. Entry-level products pull volume. Top-tier brands pull prestige and loyalty. The middle has to work harder to justify its space. Flex couldn't escape that pressure. Even when the tools performed well, their price position slowed decisions. Slower decisions meant slower sales. And slower sales fed directly back into the shelf math discussed earlier. From Lowe's perspective, Flex wasn't confusing customers. It was confusing the aisle. And when a brand disrupts buying flow instead of simplifying it, it becomes expendable. That leads to the next factor that quietly sealed Flex's fate. Lowe's didn't actually need Flex to win the tool aisle. Lowe's didn't need Flex to win the tool aisle. Big box retailers don't stock brands to give shoppers more choices. They stock brands to solve buying problems as efficiently as possible. Every brand on the shelf has to justify why it exists alongside the others, not just in isolation, but as part of the entire aisle strategy. That's where Flex ran into another structural problem at Lowe's. Most Flex tools lived in categories that were already fully covered. Drills, impact drivers, grinders, saws, nothing Flex offered created a new reason for a customer to enter the aisle or stay longer. From a retail standpoint, Flex wasn't additive, it was overlapping. Overlap is dangerous in a crowded category. When two brands serve the same use cases at similar performance levels, the retailer starts asking a different question. If one disappears, does the sale disappear with it? Or does the customer simply choose the next closest option? In Flex's case, the answer was usually the second. Lowe's could remove Flex from a shelf and still complete the customer's purchase. The buyer might switch brands, but the store didn't lose the transaction. That makes the brand easier to reduce or eliminate without revenue risk. There's also a merchandising reality at play. Power tool aisles are designed to move customers quickly from problem to solution. The more brands that occupy the same mental space, the more friction the aisle creates. Retailers actively remove friction, even if that means offering fewer choices. Flex required explanation. It wasn't a default. It wasn't a legacy name that customers automatically trusted. That meant it slowed down decisions rather than accelerating them. Another factor is control. Lowe's favors brands it can influence heavily through pricing, bundles, exclusives, or private label strategy. That control lets the retailer steer promotions, manage margins, and respond quickly to market shifts. Flex didn't give Lowe's enough leverage in those areas. Without exclusivity, without a unique category role, and without deep integration into Lowe's long-term merchandising plans, Flex became interchangeable. And interchangeable brands don't get protected when space gets tight. This is why the move away from Flex wasn't dramatic. It didn't require a big announcement. It didn't disrupt the aisle. From Lowe's perspective, the tool section still worked the same way without it. Once a brand reaches that point, the next step is almost automatic. The retailer starts asking not just whether the brand is redundant, but whether it's worth the ongoing cost of keeping it visible. That's where the conversation shifts away from tools entirely and toward batteries, accessories, and long-term basket value. And that's what sealed Flex's position on the shelf. The battery and accessory problem that quietly changed everything. Up to this point, everything we've talked about has been visible on the surface: shelf space, pricing, overlap. But this is where the decision really locked in. because batteries and accessories are where big box retailers actually make their money. Tools get customers in the door. Batteries, chargers, blades, bits, and add-ons are what keep them profitable. When Lowe's evaluates a power tool brand, it doesn't stop at how often the tool sells. It looks at what happens after the tool leaves the shelf. Does the customer come back for more batteries? Do they buy accessories tied to that platform? Do those purchases repeat over time? This is where Flex struggled the most. Flex tools sold, but the ecosystem didn't attach at the same rate. Customers were more likely to buy a single tool or a kit and stop there. Fewer follow-up purchases meant fewer return visits tied specifically to Flex. From a retail perspective, that's a problem. Battery platforms are supposed to lock customers in. Once someone commits, every future purchase reinforces that ecosystem. Brands that succeed in-store create predictable, repeat traffic. Flex didn't generate that same long-term basket value at scale. Accessories tell a similar story. Fast-moving add-ons are critical because they're low risk, high margin, and easy to restock. Flex accessories didn't move fast enough to justify the space they occupied, especially when compared to accessories tied to more established platforms. This creates a hidden imbalance. Even if the tools themselves perform adequately, the surrounding ecosystem starts to look inefficient on paper. And retail decisions are made on the total footprint, not individual hero products. If you're finding this breakdown useful so far, this is the kind of behind-the-scenes retail logic we dig into regularly, so consider liking the video or subscribing if you want more explanations like this without the hype. Once a brand underperforms in ecosystem sales, the risk calculation changes. Keeping those tools on the floor means committing space to batteries and accessories that don't reliably pay it back. At that point, the brand isn't just slow, it's expensive to maintain. And when a retailer starts thinking in terms of risk instead of opportunity, the next factors come into play quickly. Things customers never see, but stores track obsessively. That's where shrink, returns, and in-store risk enter the picture. Shrink, returns, and risk. The silent execution. One of the least visible reasons brands lose shelf space has nothing to do with sales volume at all. It has to do with risk. Inside a big box store, not all products carry the same operational cost, even if they generate similar revenue. Premium power tools carry higher risk the moment they hit the floor. Higher priced items are more attractive targets for theft, more expensive to lose, and more costly to insure. Even a small increase in shrink lost, stolen, or damaged inventory can erase the profit advantage of a tool that already sells more slowly. Retail systems track this relentlessly, even if customers never hear about it. Flex sits in a risky zone. The tools are valuable enough to be targeted, but not ubiquitous enough to blend into the aisle. That combination makes losses more noticeable in reporting. When shrink data is reviewed alongside sales velocity, brands like Flex start to look expensive to maintain. Returns compound the issue. Mid-premium tools tend to get returned at higher rates than entry-level tools. Some buyers overestimate their needs. Others compare at home and bring products back. Every return creates friction, restocking labor, repackaging, markdown risk, or outright loss if the item can't go back on the shelf. From the store's perspective, a returned tool is worse than a slow seller. It costs money twice. These risks don't get press releases. They don't get explanations on the sales floor, but they show up clearly in internal scorecards. When a brand is already under pressure from slower turnover and unclear positioning, added risk accelerates decisions. This is how brands get quietly deprioritized, not through one dramatic failure, but through accumulated friction that never quite goes away. Once that friction crosses a threshold, retailers look for safer ways to keep selling the product without carrying the in-store risk. That's where the shift you're seeing now makes sense, because the next move wasn't removing Flex entirely. It was moving Flex somewhere. The risk disappears. Why Lowe's is comfortable moving Flex online only. When a brand starts disappearing from physical shelves but remains available online, that's not a compromise. It's a decision. And for Lowe's, moving Flex online solves several problems at once. Online listings don't compete for shelf space. They don't need planogram approval. They don't get measured by revenue per linear foot. That alone removes the biggest pressure Flex faced inside stores. Selling Flex online also reduces risk. There's no exposure to theft, no damaged boxes sitting on shelves, No partially empty displays signaling low demand. Inventory can sit in a warehouse without visually failing in front of customers. From Lowe's perspective, this is a containment strategy. Online only allows Lowe's to keep Flex available for shoppers who already want it, without forcing the brand to justify itself inside the aisle every day. If someone searches for Flex specifically, the sale still happens. If they don't, Lowe's hasn't lost anything. This is also where consumer perception often gets it wrong. Online availability feels like survival. Internally, it's closer to deprioritization. Brands that are central to a retailer's strategy fight to stay visible in store. Brands that move online only are no longer part of the physical shopping experience Lowe's is actively shaping. That doesn't mean Flex is being abandoned. It means Flex is no longer being defended. Online sales data can still be monitored. Performance can still be evaluated. But the urgency is gone. The brand no longer influences aisle design, store flow, or impulse decisions. It exists for intentional buyers only, and that's the key distinction. Lowe's isn't betting on Flex to attract customers anymore. It's simply allowing Flex to serve the customers who already know what they want. That shift tells you exactly where Flex sits in Lowe's priorities. And once a brand reaches that stage, the final question isn't whether it's good or bad, it's whether the retailer still needs it at all. That's what we're addressing next, as we zoom out and look at what this decision really means. Not just for Flex, but for how big box retailers quietly reshape entire categories without ever announcing it. This was a strategic pullback, not a brand collapse. By this point, it should be clear that what happened to Flex at Lowe's wasn't sudden, emotional, or reactive. It was gradual, calculated, and procedural. That distinction matters because it changes how this move should be interpreted. Brands that are collapsing trigger emergency behavior. Retailers rush to clear inventory. Prices drop fast. Communication becomes visible because the goal is liquidation. None of that happened here. Flex wasn't blown out. It was scaled back. That tells you Lowe's wasn't trying to escape a bad situation. It was optimizing one. From Lowe's perspective, reducing Flex's in-store presence lowered risk without breaking the category. The aisle still worked. Customers still bought tools. Revenue stayed intact. That's exactly what a successful strategic pullback looks like. For Flex, staying partially available, especially online, keeps the brand alive inside the ecosystem without forcing Lowe's to commit shelf space. That's not ideal for Flex, but it's far from a collapse. It's containment. This kind of move buys time. It allows Lowe's to reallocate space to faster-moving brands, while keeping Flex accessible to buyers who specifically want it. It also lets Flex continue selling without the pressure of justifying physical shelf space every quarter. What matters here is intent. Lowe's didn't reject Flex outright. It simply stopped prioritizing it. And in big box retail, deprioritization is very different from failure. That's why this situation feels confusing from the outside. People expect brand exits to be loud. In reality, most of them are quiet adjustments designed to reduce exposure, not make statements. So when you see Flex tools missing from shelves, the correct takeaway isn't "this brand is dying." The correct takeaway is this brand no longer fits the in-store math. And that leads directly to the final question viewers actually care about. What does all of this mean for you right now if you're thinking about buying Flex? What this actually means for you before you buy Flex. At this point, the situation should be clear. Flex isn't disappearing because the tools are bad. They're being pulled back because they don't fit cleanly into how Lowe's optimizes physical retail space. But clarity matters most when it affects your money. If you already own Flex tools, this move doesn't suddenly make them a bad investment. The tools will still work the same way tomorrow as they did yesterday. Parts, batteries, and online availability aren't vanishing overnight. For existing owners, this is more about awareness than panic. Where the decision gets more complicated is for new buyers. Starting a brand new battery ecosystem is always a long-term commitment. When a brand loses in-store presence, it becomes harder to see, compare, and expand that system locally. That doesn't mean Flex is unusable. It means convenience drops, and reliance on online purchasing increases. For buyers who like researching online, ordering ahead, and don't mind waiting for shipments, Flex can still make sense, especially if pricing becomes more competitive as shelf pressure eases. Online-only brands can sometimes offer better value because they carry less retail overhead. For buyers who rely on walking into a store, grabbing what they need, and leaving the same day, Flex becomes a weaker choice. In-store support matters most when something breaks, when you need a battery immediately, or when you're expanding a kit under time pressure. This is where many people misread retail signals. A brand losing shelf space doesn't mean you should automatically avoid it, but it does mean you should be intentional. Ask yourself how you actually buy tools, not how you think you buy them. If you want maximum convenience, fast replacements, and guaranteed aisle presence, Flex's current direction may not match your habits. If you value performance and are comfortable operating mostly online, the brand can still fit. The most important takeaway is this: don't confuse retail visibility with product quality, and don't confuse product quality with ecosystem stability. Lowe's made a decision based on store efficiency, not tool failure. Understanding that lets you make a smarter choice instead of reacting emotionally to empty shelves. And once you see retail moves for what they really are, they stop being confusing and start being useful signals. What happened to Flex at Lowe's wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't personal. It was the result of retail systems doing exactly what they're designed to do: optimize space, reduce risk, and favor speed over nuance. Once you understand those mechanics, the move stops looking mysterious and starts looking inevitable. And more importantly, you're no longer fooled by what empty shelves seem to imply. If you want more breakdowns like this, where store decisions get explained instead of speculated, make sure you're subscribed.